Welcome to Divine Peace. Tonight we will tell the story of Ruth, a story of loyalty so quiet it almost went unnoticed, and so deep it changed the course of an entire bloodline. There will be no ads while you listen. If this channel brings you rest, consider subscribing, and let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. There is a kind of faithfulness that does not announce itself. It does not stand at the front of the room and ask to be recognized. It does not keep a record of what it has given or measure what it expects in return. It simply stays. It simply chooses again and again to remain. The story of Ruth is a story about that kind of faithfulness. It is a short story told in 4 chapters, set in the quiet corners of ancient Israel and the fields of a town called Bethlehem. Nothing explodes in this story. No armies march, no kings fall, no miracles split the sky. And yet something happens in this story that is more extraordinary than any of those things. A woman from the wrong country, with no inheritance and no guarantee, makes a single decision that places her inside the most important family line in human history. She does not know this when she makes the decision. She's not thinking about history. She's thinking about an old woman walking alone on a dusty road, and she cannot bring herself to let that woman walk alone. That is where we begin. Not with Ruth, but with Naomi. Because every story of extraordinary loyalty begins with someone who needed it. Naomi was a woman of Bethlehem, a town whose name in Hebrew means house of bread. It was a fitting name for a place that sat in the hill country of Judah, surrounded by terraced fields and quiet valleys where grain could grow. The people of Bethlehem were not wealthy, but they were rooted. They had land, they had lineage, they had the rhythms of planting and harvest that gave a family its shape and its stability. Naomi had grown up inside those rhythms. She had married a man named Elimelech, which means my God is king, and together they had built a life that was ordinary in the best possible sense of that word. They had 2 sons, Mahlon and Kilion. They had neighbours they knew by name. They had a place in the world. And then the rain stopped coming. Famines in ancient Israel were not rare, but they were devastating. The land that was meant to be flowing with milk and honey could turn hard and brittle when the seasonal rains failed to arrive. Crops withered, livestock grew thin. The granaries that were supposed to carry a family through the lean season emptied out faster than anyone expected. Bethlehem, the house of bread, found itself with very little bread at all. And when the famine stretched on long enough that it became clear it was not going to break easily, Elimelech made the decision that many men in his position made. He decided to leave. The place he chose was Moab. Moab was a nation to the east, across the Jordan River and the Salt Sea, a plateau land that sat high enough to catch rain even when the lowlands of Judah were dry. The Moabites were not Israelites. They had their own gods, their own customs, their own history. The relationship between Israel and Moab was complicated and old, woven through with both kinship and tension, going back to the days of Abraham and Lot. But in a famine, a man does not think about ancient history. He thinks about feeding his family. And Moab had food. So Elimelech gathered Naomi and their 2 sons, and they walked east, across the river, into a foreign land, intending to stay only for a little while until the rains returned to Bethlehem and life could go back to what it had been. But life has a way of not going back. Life has a way of pulling you further from what you intended than you ever thought you would go. Elimelech died in Moab. The scripture does not tell us how or when. It only tells us that he died, and that Naomi was left with her 2 sons. There is a grief in that brevity that is hard to miss. A whole life reduced to a few words. He was there, and then he was not there, and Naomi had to find a way to keep going without the man who had brought her here, to this foreign country, far from everything she knew. Her sons stayed, and in time, as young men do, they married. Mahlon married a woman named Ruth, and Kilion married a woman named Orpah. Both women were Moabites, daughters of this land that the family had come to as strangers. And for a time, for about 10 years, this patchwork family built a life together. 3 women and 2 men, woven into each other's days, sharing meals and laughter and the small rituals that hold a household together. The scripture does not dwell on these years, but they were there. They were real. Naomi had daughters-in-law she knew and loved. Ruth and Orpah had a mother-in-law who was theirs in everything but blood. The grief of losing Elimelech had softened, the way grief does, into something livable, something that was simply part of the texture of daily life. And then Mahlon died. And then Chilion died. And Naomi was left with nothing but 2 foreign daughters-in-law and a grief so total it had no bottom to it. We do not know what the sons died of. The scripture again is spare and unhurried with its information. It tells us only that both sons died and that Naomi was left without her husband and without her 2 sons. In that culture, in that time, this was not merely a personal catastrophe, it was a social one. Women without male protectors were women without standing. They could not own land in their own names in the way men could. They could not conduct business the way men could. They depended on fathers, husbands, brothers, sons to navigate the world on their behalf. Naomi had none of these. She was an Israelite widow in a Moabite land, past the age of bearing more sons, with no inheritance and no advocate and no clear path forward. Except that there was something. There was a rumour, or perhaps more than a rumour, perhaps news that had travelled across the trade roads and reached her ears. She heard that back in Bethlehem, back in Judah, the Lord had visited his people. The famine had broken. The rains had come. The fields that had been empty were full again, and the house of bread was once again living up to its name. Naomi made a decision. She would go home. It is a remarkable thing to call a place home after so many years away, to choose the road back to a life you left behind when the life you tried to build in the new place has fallen away entirely. Naomi had come to Moab with a husband and 2 sons. She was leaving with nothing except whatever remained of her dignity and a fierce, exhausted determination to return to her own people. She rose with her daughters-in-law and set out on the road toward Judah. The 3 of them walked together, 3 women in the open country between Moab and Israel. And somewhere along that road something shifted in Naomi, some awareness of what she was actually asking these 2 young women to do, and she stopped. She turned to them, and she told them to go back. "Go back to your mother's houses," she said. "You have been kind to my sons and to me. May the Lord show you the same kindness. May he give each of you rest in the house of a new husband." She blessed them and kissed them, and all 3 of them wept there on the road. They wept for everything they had lost, for the men who were gone, for the life that had been and would not be again. It was the kind of weeping that does not have a clean end, that comes in waves and recedes and comes again, the weeping of people who love each other and have been broken by the same grief. Orpah kissed Naomi and went back. This is not a condemnation of Orpah. Naomi herself had told them to go. Orpah was returning to her own people, her own gods, her own chance at a future. She was being reasonable. She was being wise in the way the world understands wisdom. She was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and she made the sensible choice. Ruth did not make the sensible choice. Ruth clung to Naomi. That is the word the scripture uses. She clung to her, and when Naomi pressed her again, when she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods, go back after her," Ruth opened her mouth and said something that has been repeated for 3,000 years and has not lost a single atom of its weight in all that time. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also if anything but death parts me from you." These words were not spoken in a moment of easy comfort. They were spoken on a road between countries, by a woman who had just buried her husband, to a woman who had just buried 2 sons, in the open air with no witnesses but the sky. Ruth was not promising something small. She was promising to leave everything she had ever known. Her family was in Moab. Her gods were in Moab. Her culture, her language as her first language, her history, everything that had made her who she was existed in Moab, and she was walking away from all of it because she could not leave an old woman alone on a road. When Naomi heard that Ruth would not be turned back, she said nothing more. The scripture tells us she stopped speaking to her about it. She simply accepted what Ruth had said, and the 2 of them walked on together toward Bethlehem. The road from Moab to Bethlehem was not a short one. It was a journey of several days at least, crossing the Jordan River at one of its fords, climbing up through the Judean hills, passing through country that Naomi had not seen in a decade. Every step of that road was a kind of reckoning. She was going back to a place that knew her as she had been, and she was returning as something entirely different. She had left with a family. She was coming back with a widowhood and a foreign daughter-in-law. She had left with hope. She was coming back having had that hope stripped from her by death and time and circumstance. But Ruth was beside her on the road. Ruth, who had made a promise she did not have to make, who had chosen loyalty over logic, who had looked at an old woman's grief and decided that the right response to it was to share it rather than leave it behind. They walked together, two widows with nothing between them but love and the long dusty road, and they arrived in Bethlehem just as the barley harvest was beginning. The whole town stirred when Naomi arrived. Small towns have long memories, and the people of Bethlehem remembered her. They came out to meet her, and the women of the town said, "Is this Naomi?" And Naomi, who had lived long enough and lost enough to be done with softening the truth, said, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Naomi means pleasant. Mara means bitter." She was telling her neighbours that the woman they remembered was gone, that bitterness had taken her place, that she was not who she had been when she left. It is a startlingly honest speech for a woman who had just arrived home after years away. There is no false cheerfulness in it, no performance of resilience for the sake of the community's comfort. She simply told the truth about what had happened to her and what it had cost her, and Ruth stood beside her while she said it. Ruth, the Moabite, who was new to this place, who did not know these women or this town or what Naomi had been before the grief had taken hold, stood quietly at her side and did not leave. They had arrived at the right moment. The barley harvest had begun, which meant that the fields outside of Bethlehem were full of workers cutting grain, and full also of the gleanings that the law of Moses required the harvesters to leave behind. The law was specific about this. You were not to reap the corners of your field. You were not to go back over a field to pick up what the harvesters had missed. You were to leave those things for the poor and the stranger and the widow. It was a provision built into the agricultural economy of ancient Israel, a recognition that not everyone had land, and that the people who did have land had an obligation to the people who did not. Ruth understood immediately what this meant for them. She asked Naomi for permission to go out to the fields and glean among the ears of grain after the harvesters, hoping to find favour in someone's eyes. It is a quietly courageous thing to do. Gleaning was hard work, bending and gathering under the hot sun, following behind the harvesters to pick up what they had left behind, dependent on the goodwill of the landowner not to drive you away or mistreat you. It was the work of the very bottom of the social order. Ruth, who had been a married woman in her own country, who had had a household of her own, was now a foreign widow in a strange land, about to spend her days bent over stubble in someone else's field. She went, and she happened, as the scripture puts it with a casualness that barely conceals the hand of providence, to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. Boaz was a wealthy man. The scripture establishes this early and without apology, because his wealth matters to the story. He was a man of standing in Bethlehem, a landowner with fields and servants, and the kind of social position that gave him the power to be generous, or not generous, as he chose. He was also, though the story does not emphasize this yet, a relative of Elimelech. He was part of the family that Naomi's husband had come from, which meant that by the complex laws of Israelite kinship and inheritance, he had a connection to the widows who had just arrived in Bethlehem that went deeper than simple neighbourliness. He arrived at his field that day to check on the harvest, greeting his workers with the words, "May the Lord be with you," and receiving in return the blessing, "The Lord bless you." It is a small exchange, this mutual blessing between a landowner and his workers, but it tells you something about the kind of man Boaz was. He was a man who moved through the world with God in his mouth. This was not piety for show. It was the language of a man who actually believed the words he was saying. He noticed Ruth almost immediately. She was not hard to notice. She was a stranger in the field, foreign in her appearance and her manner, bent low over the stubble and gathering with a quiet and persistent diligence. He asked his foreman who she was, and the foreman told him. "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said to me, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the harvesters.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Boaz walked over to where Ruth was gleaning, and he spoke to her. He told her not to go to glean in another field, not to leave this one, but to stay close to his young women. He told her that he had commanded his young men not to touch her. He told her that when she was thirsty she could go to the vessels and drink what the young men had drawn. And then he said something that must have stopped Ruth's hands in the stubble. He said he had been told all that she had done for her mother-in-law after the death of her husband. He had heard about how she had left her father and mother and the land of her birth and had come to a people she did not know. "The Lord repay you for what you have done," he said, "and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Ruth fell on her face and bowed to the ground. She was overwhelmed, she said, by his kindness. She was a foreigner, she reminded him. Why had he noticed her? The question underneath the question was, why had he treated her as though she mattered? Foreigners in ancient Israel were not always mistreated, but they were not always included either. They existed at the margins of the community, dependent on the goodwill of others, never quite belonging. Ruth had known this when she chose to come. She had made her promise to Naomi knowing that she was trading a place of belonging for a place of perpetual outsideness. And now this wealthy landowner was speaking to her as though she deserved his attention, as though her story mattered, as though the choice she had made on that road between Moab and Bethlehem was the kind of thing a person should honour rather than overlook. At mealtime, Boaz called to her and told her to come and eat. He passed her roasted grain and she ate until she was satisfied and had some left over. And then, quietly, in a gesture the workers may or may not have noticed, he instructed his young men to let her glean even among the sheaves and not to rebuke her. More than that, he told them to deliberately pull out stalks from the bundles and leave them for her to gather. He was not just allowing her to glean, he was rigging the field in her favour. He was making sure that this foreign widow who had walked across a country for an old woman's sake would go home that evening with more grain than she had any right to expect. She gleaned in the field until evening, and when she beat out what she had gathered, it was about an ephah of barley. An ephah was a significant amount, roughly 20 to 30 pounds of grain, enough to feed 2 women for several days. She carried it back to town, and she also brought out what she had left over from her meal and gave it to Naomi. Naomi looked at what Ruth had brought, and her eyes must have widened. "Where did you glean today?" she asked, "and where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth told her that the man's name was Boaz, and something happened in Naomi's face in that moment. "May he be blessed by the Lord," she said, "whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." And then she added, "That man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." That word, redeemer, is the translation of a Hebrew word, goel, that carried specific legal and social meaning in ancient Israel. A goel was a kinsman who had the right and the responsibility to step in and restore what a family had lost. If a man died without children and left a widow, his nearest male relative could marry the widow and have children with her in the dead man's name, so that his name would not disappear from Israel and his property would not pass out of the family. If a man's land had to be sold in hard times, his nearest relative had the right to buy it back and keep it in the family. The goel was a kind of living insurance policy built into the structure of Israelite society, a guarantee that no family line would simply vanish because of misfortune. Naomi had known that Boaz was a relative. She had not known until this moment that he had noticed Ruth, but now she knew both things, and her mind, which had been clouded by grief and bitterness since the deaths of her sons, began to think. She told Ruth to stay close to Boaz's young women throughout the harvest, to not go into any other field, and Ruth did. She gleaned in the fields of Boaz through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest that followed, living with Naomi, going out each morning to the fields and coming back each evening with grain, and sometimes with food left over from the meals Boaz provided. The days settled into a rhythm. The grief did not go away, but it became something the 2 women could carry together, something they shared rather than bore alone. And the question of what came next, of how 2 widows with no land and no male protector were going to build a future in Bethlehem, waited quietly in the background, patient as the grain ripening in the fields. Naomi was watching all of this. She was watching Boaz, and she was watching the way the harvest season was moving toward its end, and she was thinking about a plan. The plan she devised was a bold one. Perhaps, to modern ears, it sounds strange. But inside the culture and the laws of ancient Israel, inside the logic of the goel system and the rights it created, Naomi's plan had a kind of elegant precision. She was going to ask Boaz to be their redeemer, and she was going to ask him through Ruth. She called Ruth to her and told her what she knew. "Boaz is winnowing barley at the threshing floor tonight," she said. "Wash and anoint yourself and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." Ruth listened to all of this and said simply, "All that you say, I will do." She had promised on a road in Moab that where Naomi went she would go, and what Naomi asked she would do. She was keeping that promise in a new and unexpected direction now, walking down to the threshing floor in the dark of the night, carrying her mother-in-law's hope with her into a situation whose outcome was not guaranteed. The threshing floor was a social place as well as a working one. After the long days of cutting and binding and carrying, the evening of threshing and winnowing was a time of celebration for the harvesters, a time of eating and drinking and the satisfaction of a harvest well completed. Boaz ate and drank, and his heart was merry, and he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And Ruth came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight Boaz was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman was lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The phrase "spread your wings" was not incidental. Boaz had said earlier, in the field, that she had come to take refuge under the wings of the God of Israel. Now she was asking him to extend those wings over her. She was asking him to be the embodiment of the divine protection he had prayed over her. She was asking him, in the formal language of covenant and kinship, to fulfill his role as Goel and redeem what Naomi's family had lost. Boaz did not hesitate. He blessed her. He told her that all the town of Bethlehem knew she was a worthy woman. He acknowledged that he was a redeemer, and he also told her something she may not have known. "There is a redeemer nearer than I," he said. There was another man in Bethlehem who was more closely related to Elimelech than Boaz was, and under the law that man had the first right to act as Goel. If that man was willing, he had the prior claim. But if he was not, Boaz said, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. He told her to remain the rest of the night, and in the morning he filled her shawl with 6 measures of barley and sent her back to town before it was light enough for anyone to recognize her, protecting her reputation by ensuring that no one would know she had spent the night at the threshing floor. She went back to Naomi. "All that the man did for me," she told her, and Naomi listened to every word. And then Naomi said the thing that contains within it a kind of quiet confidence in the character of the man they were dealing with. "Sit still," she said. "Wait. The man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." And she was right. Boaz went up to the gate of Bethlehem that morning and sat down. The gate of the city was where business was transacted, where legal matters were settled, where the elders of the town gathered to witness agreements and adjudicate disputes. It was the courthouse and the town hall and the marketplace all in one location. Boaz was not going to wait for the matter to resolve itself. He was going to resolve it himself. The other redeemer, the closer kinsman, came by, and Boaz called to him and asked him to sit down. He gathered 10 of the elders of the city and asked them to sit down too, and with these witnesses assembled he explained the situation. "Naomi," he said, "who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know. For there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And the man said he would redeem it. Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also buying Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." And the other redeemer changed his answer. He said he could not redeem it. He had his own inheritance to think of, and adding a wife and the obligation to have children in the name of a dead man would complicate his inheritance in ways he was not willing to accept. He told Boaz to take his right of redemption himself, and he drew off his sandal, which was the custom in Israel to confirm such an agreement, and he handed it to Boaz. Boaz turned to the elders and to all the people who were there, and he made his declaration. "You are witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and to Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife. to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. The elders and the people who were at the gate said, We are witnesses. And they blessed Boaz and Ruth with a blessing that called on the names of Rachel and Leah, the mothers of the 12 tribes of Israel. They were placing this foreign woman from Moab inside the great lineage of the covenant people. They were saying, with their blessing, that Ruth belonged here, that she had earned her place, that the loyalty she had shown on a road between countries was the same quality of loyalty that had built a nation. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. The women of the neighborhood gave him his name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. That is how the story ends. Or rather, that is where the story closes, because the ending is not really an ending at all. The ending is a beginning. The son born to Ruth and Boaz became the grandfather of the greatest king Israel ever had. The bloodline that ran through David ran through Obed, and Obed was born because Ruth made a promise on a road that she did not have to make. The king who would write half the Psalms, the king whose name would echo through 1,000 years of prophecy, the king from whose line the whole tradition promised a final and ultimate redemption would one day come. That king existed because a young widow from Moab looked at an old woman walking alone and decided she could not let her walk alone. This is what loyalty does when it's the real thing. It does not only comfort the person it is given to, it ripples outward in ways neither the giver nor the receiver can see or predict. Ruth was not thinking about David when she clung to Naomi on that road. She was not thinking about anything except the woman in front of her and the choice she was being asked to make. She made the choice with no knowledge of where it would lead, with no guarantee of reward, with nothing but the conviction that it was the right thing to do. And that choice rewrote a bloodline. The Hebrew word for the kind of love Ruth showed is hesed. It is one of those words that resists clean translation. It has been rendered as loving kindness, as steadfast love, as loyalty, as covenant faithfulness. It is the love that does not depend on what it gets in return. It is the love that stays when leaving would be easier. It is the love that bends down to the stubble in someone else's field because there is nothing else to do and something that must be done. Hesed is what Ruth showed Naomi on the road, and in the fields, and in the long quiet evenings when two women sat together in a small house in Bethlehem and shared what little they had. It is what Boaz showed Ruth when he quietly rigged the field in her favour and told his workers not to rebuke her. It is what the elders of Bethlehem showed when they blessed her with the names of the mothers of Israel. Hesed spreads from person to person like a kind of contagion, the good kind, the kind that makes the world slowly more livable than it was before. The quiet ones are the ones history almost misses. They are not loud about their choices. They do not gather witnesses or keep score. They simply do the next faithful thing, and then the next one, and then the one after that. Ruth gleaned in the fields every day through the long weeks of the harvest. This was not exciting work. It was repetitive and physically demanding and humble in every sense of the word. She did it anyway, day after day, carrying home what she gathered, bringing food to a woman who had arrived in Bethlehem calling herself bitter. She did not try to fix Naomi's bitterness. She did not tell her to look on the bright side or count her blessings. She just came home every evening with grain in her arms and sat down beside her, and slowly, the way warmth slowly fills a cold room, the bitterness began to have something else beside it. Naomi's last words in the story are about Obed. The women of the neighborhood said a son has been born to Naomi, and they put the child in her arms, and the scripture says she laid him on her bosom and became his nurse. The woman who had told her neighbors to call her Mara, the woman who had said she went out full and came back empty, was holding a baby. She was not empty anymore. She was the grandmother of the man who would be the grandfather of David, and she was alive to know it because a young woman from Moab had refused to let her walk home alone. There is a kind of faithfulness that does not announce itself. It simply stays. It simply chooses again and again, in the big moments and the quiet ones, in the dramatic and the ordinary, to remain. The story of Ruth is a story about that kind of faithfulness. It is a story about what it looks like to take a single road in front of you and walk it all the way to its end. It is a story about how the smallest and most private acts of loyalty can carry inside them a weight far greater than the person performing them will ever know. wherever you are tonight, whatever road you are on, whatever choices are in front of you, let the story of Ruth settle over you like a quiet thing. Let it remind you that faithfulness does not always look like something dramatic. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like showing up. Sometimes it looks like bending down in someone else's field and gathering what is there and carrying it home and setting it on the table and doing it again tomorrow. The fields are always ready to receive whoever is willing to come. The question Ruth answered on a road outside of Moab is the same question every generation answers in its own way. Who will you stay for? What will you carry? How far will you walk? She walked all the way, and the world that came after her is different because she did. Rest now. Let these words settle into the quiet places in you. Let the story of Ruth accompany you down into sleep, a companion for the dark hours, a voice that reminds you, even in the wordless language of dreams, that loyalty is never wasted, that faithfulness always goes further than we can see, that the quiet choices are the ones that change everything. Good night, and may you rest in peace. There is something about the way ancient stories begin that tells you immediately what kind of story you are in. Some stories begin with a king on a throne, or an army at the gates of a city, or a prophet receiving a vision from God in fire and thunder. These are the stories that announce themselves loudly, that say from the first sentence, pay attention, something enormous is happening here. The story of Ruth does not begin that way. It begins with a man leaving home. It begins with a family making an ordinary decision in a difficult time, the kind of decision that millions of families across human history have made when the circumstances of their lives made staying impossible. They went looking for something better, the way people have always gone looking for something better, crossing borders and rivers and deserts with their children and their hope and their incomplete knowledge of what waited on the other side. Elimelech was not a famous man. He did not lead armies or build temples or speak the word of God to kings. He was a man of Bethlehem who loved his wife and his sons and wanted them to eat. When the famine came and the fields of Judah dried up and the town that was supposed to be the house of bread had no bread in it, he made the only choice that seemed available to him. He took his family east, across the river, into the country of Moab. He was doing what fathers do when everything else has failed. He was trying to keep his people alive. Moab was not an enemy nation in this moment. The hostility between Israel and Moab was old and complicated, going back to the days when the Moabite king Balak had tried to hire the prophet Balaam to curse Israel as they travelled through the wilderness toward Canaan. But that was ancient history, the kind that lives in texts rather than in daily life, and in any case the relationship between the two peoples had never been one of pure antagonism. Moabite women had married Israelite men before. The geography brought them into contact. The long plateau of Moab rising to the east of the Salt Sea, visible from the hills of Judah on a clear day, close enough that in hard times people moved between them looking for what they needed. The family settled in Moab. They were not just passing through. The Hebrew word used suggests a more extended stay, a sojourning that was always meant to be temporary, but that the logic of daily life kept extending. There was food in Moab, the boys were growing. Naomi was building something like a life in this foreign place, learning the rhythms of a different culture, finding her footing in a land where she would always be an outsider, but where she was no longer starving. The temporary kept becoming permanent in the way that temporary things often do, one season rolling into the next, one reason to stay accumulating on top of another. And then Elimelech died, and the shape of everything changed. Death does that. It does not only remove the person who dies, it rearranges everyone who is left behind. The people who survive a death find themselves in a different configuration, occupying new roles, discovering things about themselves they would never have discovered if the person had lived. Naomi discovered that she was stronger than she knew, and lonelier than she could have anticipated, and that the foreign country she had come to with her husband felt very different when she was in it alone. She had her sons. For a while, she had her sons, and that was enough to keep the structure of her life from collapsing entirely. Mahlon and Chilion were young men, and young men are present and energetic and future-oriented in ways that pull a grieving mother forward, even when she would prefer to stand still. They married Moabite women. This was not unusual given where they were living. If you spend your formative years in a country, you meet people from that country, and you fall in love with people from that country, and if you are a young man without a father to arrange a marriage back in Bethlehem, you marry the person in front of you who has captured your heart. Ruth and Orpah became part of the family, daughters-in-law to Naomi, wives to her sons, woven into the daily fabric of a household that was doing its best to be a home even in an unfamiliar land. For 10 years this worked. 10 years is a long time. It is long enough for people to become essential to each other, long enough for habits and affections and quiet understandings to develop between people who are not born to each other, but who have chosen each other. Naomi knew Ruth for 10 years before she stood on a road outside of Moab and tried to send her back. She knew the sound of her voice, and the way she moved, and the things she found funny, and the things that made her fall silent. She had been her daughter for a decade, in everything but blood. Then Marlon died. Then Killian died. And the 10 years of building were undone in what the scripture implies was a fairly short period of time. 2 young men, gone. 2 husbands, 2 sons, the 2 people who had given both Naomi and her daughters-in-law their social standing and their practical security. The household that had been a going concern, a daily life with shape and purpose and people in it, was now 3 widows trying to figure out how to exist in a world that had not made much provision for widows without male protectors. Naomi heard that the famine in Judah had ended. She heard that God had visited his people, which in the language of the time meant that the rains had come, and the crops had grown, and the people of Bethlehem could eat again. She made her decision with the quiet finality of someone who has run out of other options. She would go home. She had nothing left in Moab now. No husband, no sons, and the daughter of her daughters-in-law's mothers would give them better prospects in Moab than they would find, attached to a foreign widow walking back to her own country. She would go home, and she would go alone. She told Ruth and Orpah to return to their mother's houses. She was specific about this. Not their father's houses, their mother's houses, and some readers have noticed the detail and wondered about it. Father's houses were the standard way of referring to a woman's family of origin in ancient Israel, and in much of the ancient Near East. Mother's houses appear only rarely, and when they do, they tend to be associated with marriage negotiations and the domestic space where women's lives were primarily organised. Naomi was sending her daughters-in-law back to the sphere of female life, back to the place where they had been daughters before they were wives, back to the women who would know best how to help them find husbands again in a country that was their own. She blessed them. She had been their mother-in-law for 10 years, and she had loved them as mothers love, and she blessed them with the specific blessing that she believed they needed most. "May the Lord deal kindly with you," she said, using the word hesed. "May he show you the same covenant faithfulness that you have shown to the dead and to me. May you each find rest in the house of a husband." She was releasing them not with bitterness but with generosity, pushing them toward a future she believed they could still have, a future she no longer believed was available to her. They wept. All 3 of them wept, standing on that road between worlds. There was a decade of shared life in those tears, all the small dailiness of living together, the meals and the mornings, the grief they had already shared over the deaths of their husbands, the way they had learned to read each other's moods and needs and silences. They wept because they loved each other and because love, when it runs into an ending, expresses itself in tears. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law and went back. She made the reasonable choice, the kind choice in a certain sense, the choice that accepted Naomi's own logic and honoured it. She returned to her people and her gods, back to the sphere of life where she had a chance of building something new. And Naomi watched her go with gratitude, because she had told them to go and she had meant it. But Ruth clung to her. The word the Hebrew uses for this clinging, dabak, is the same word used in the 2nd chapter of Genesis to describe how a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. It is not a casual word. It is the word for the bond that joins 2 lives together, the word for attachment that does not dissolve easily, that holds even under pressure. Ruth clung to Naomi the way you cling to something that has become part of you, the way you hold on when letting go would mean losing something of yourself. Naomi tried again. She pointed out that Orpah had gone back. She pointed out the practical impossibility of what Ruth seemed to be choosing. She had no more sons to offer as husbands. Even if she were to marry tonight and have sons, would Ruth wait for them to grow up? The logic was unanswerable. There was nothing Naomi could give Ruth that would compensate for what Ruth would be giving up by following her. The case for leaving was airtight. "Go back," Naomi said. "The Lord has testified against me, which is to say, my luck has run out, my blessings have been exhausted, I am a woman to whom bad things happen, and you should not attach yourself to me." And Ruth answered her, She answered not with logic, but with a declaration. She made a speech that has the quality of a vow, the quality of a promise that is not contingent on circumstances, that does not have an escape clause built into it. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also if anything but death parts me from you. This is the language of covenant. In the ancient world, covenants were not just agreements between parties who expected to benefit equally from the arrangement. Covenants were commitments that bound the parties together regardless of what either of them stood to gain or lose. They were formalized by oaths, by ceremonies, by the calling down of divine witness. Ruth was using covenant language to bind herself to an old woman who had told her she had nothing to offer. She was making a promise with no upside guaranteed. She was choosing the person over the calculation. When Naomi heard that Ruth was not going to be turned back, she stopped speaking. This is a remarkable detail. The woman who had just made a very thorough case for why Ruth should go home fell silent when she saw that Ruth had made up her mind. She did not keep arguing, she did not try one more time. She simply accepted what was being given to her, and they went on together. Bethlehem was already stirring with the energy of the barley harvest when they arrived. The town was buzzing with the return of the rains and the promise of abundance after the years of famine. And into this buzzing, hopeful town came two women in mourning, walking together through the gates, drawing attention not because they were dramatic, but because Naomi was known here, and her return after so many years was unexpected. The women who came out to greet her were genuinely surprised. Is this Naomi? And Naomi told them who she was now, in the aftermath of everything. Mara. Not pleasant, but bitter. I went out full and came back empty. It was an honest accounting of loss, a refusal to put a cheerful face on a decade of grief. She was not performing resilience for the community's benefit. She was telling the truth. But she was not entirely empty. She had Ruth. And Ruth, who is mentioned almost as an afterthought at the end of this section of the story, so returned Naomi and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, was already doing what Ruth did. She was present. She was beside her. She was there. The field was golden in the early morning light, the barley standing tall and heavy with grain, the harvesters moving through it with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this work every year of their lives. It was communal labour, the harvest, the whole community organised around the task of getting the grain in before the weather changed. Men cut the stalks with sickles, women bound them into sheaves, others carried the sheaves to the threshing floor. The rhythm of it was ancient and reliable, the same every year, the same as it had been in the time of their grandparents and their grandparents' grandparents. Ruth moved through the field at the edges, behind the harvesters, gathering what they left behind. She was not part of the communal effort. She was peripheral to it, dependent on its leavings, occupying the position that the law had made for the poor and the stranger. She worked with the same diligence that would come to characterize everything she did in this story. Early in the morning until evening, with only a short rest. She did not take what she had not been given. She did not complain about the heat, or the bent back, or the inadequacy of what gleaning could produce. She worked because Naomi needed her to work, and that was enough reason. Boaz came from Bethlehem to check on his field, and on the workers he'd hired to bring in his harvest. He was a man at ease in this world, comfortable with his prosperity and generous with it, the kind of landowner who knew his workers by name and greeted them with blessings and meant the blessings when he said them. His workers blessed him back, and there is something in this small exchange that tells you the relationship between this man and the people who worked for him was not simply transactional. There was warmth in it. There was genuine regard. He saw Ruth. He asked about her. His foreman told him who she was and where she'd come from and how diligently she had been working since early morning. And Boaz went to her. What he said to her was not obligatory. He was not required by law to say anything more than to allow her to glean in his field, which the law already required of him. But Boaz went further than the law required. He told her not to leave his field, to stay close to his young women, to drink from the vessels his workers had drawn when she was thirsty, to know that he had commanded his men not to touch her. He surrounded her with protections she had no right to demand and no way to enforce. He gave them freely because he had heard her story, and her story had moved him. "I have been told," he said, "all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." He saw her clearly. He named what she had done and he gave it the weight it deserved. He called it what it was, a remarkable act of loyalty and love and courage, the choice of a woman who had left everything she knew for the sake of an old woman's grief, and he asked God to honour it the way it deserved to be honoured. Ruth fell on her face before him. She was not performing deference. She was genuinely undone by his kindness. She was a foreigner, she told him, and he had noticed her, and this was more than she had expected from the world she'd walked into when she crossed the border from Moab into Judah. The world she'd walked into had every reason to overlook her and had not. This man, this wealthy Israelite landowner with no obligation to her whatsoever, had seen her and spoken to her with honour, and had prayed for her with what sounded like sincerity. At the meal, he invited her to come and eat. He passed her roasted grain with his own hands, and she ate until she was satisfied and had some left over, and something in that detail is quietly important. She had enough. She did not merely survive the meal. She had enough and to spare, which was the first time in a long time that enough and to spare had described her situation. She tucked away what was left over and she took it home to Naomi later, a small sign of abundance that neither of them had felt in years. And Boaz, when she went back to work in the afternoon, quietly told his young men to pull stalks from the bundles and leave them for her on purpose. He was not just letting her glean what fell naturally. He was manufacturing abundance for her, making the field more generous than it would have been on its own, ensuring that when she beat out her gleaning that evening she would have more than she could have gathered by the ordinary rules of the ordinary system. He was using his power to help her in a way that looked accidental but was entirely deliberate. She beat out what she had gathered, and it was about an affair of barley, a remarkable quantity for a single day of gleaning. She picked up the grain and went into the city and showed her mother-in-law what she had gleaned and also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. Naomi looked at the grain. "Where did you glean today and where have you worked?" she asked. "And blessed be the man who took notice of you." And when Ruth told her it was Boaz, Naomi's voice changed. "May he be blessed by the Lord," she said, "whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." And then she said, "That man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." The word redeemer opened something in the story that had been waiting to open. There was a path forward. There was a man in Bethlehem who was related to the family they had lost, who had the legal right and possibly the willingness to step into the gap that the deaths of Mahlon and Elimelech had left. The Goel system was not a guarantee. The closer kinsman would have to be willing, and even if he was willing there might be complications. But it was something. It was more than the nothing they had arrived with. Naomi told Ruth to stay in Boaz's field through the harvest, and Ruth stayed close to the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and of the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. The days accumulated, the grain accumulated, and Naomi, who had arrived in Bethlehem calling herself Mara, began to think not about what she had lost but about what might still be possible. She was thinking about the threshing floor. She was thinking about the night when the harvest work would be finished, and the men would eat and celebrate and lie down to sleep among the winnowed grain, and about what Ruth could do in the dark, in the hours between midnight and dawn, that might change the future. The plan Naomi made was not without risk. Ruth going to the threshing floor at night, uncovering the feet of a sleeping man, was an act that could have been misunderstood. It was an act that depended entirely on the character of the man being approached, and on the character of the woman doing the approaching. Naomi trusted Boaz because she'd known him from before, from the life she'd lived in Bethlehem before Elimelech took them east, from the clan she had married into when she married Elimelech. She knew what kind of man he was, and she trusted Ruth because she had known Ruth for 10 years, had lived beside her, and watched her, and received her loyalty every day of those years. She was betting on two people she understood deeply, and she was asking them to meet each other at midnight on a threshing floor and see what would become of it. Ruth did exactly what Naomi said. She washed and anointed herself and put on her cloak, and when the time was right she went down to the threshing floor. She waited until Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, and he had gone to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight he was startled and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked in the dark, and she told him, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The word wings. The same wings he had invoked when he prayed for her in the field. "Under whose wings you have come to take refuge." She was asking him to become the answer to his own prayer, to step into the role of the divine protector and make that protection concrete and human and real. She was not asking him to do something for her that was beneath him. She was asking him to do something that his own faith had already pointed toward, something that the structure of his world had made possible, something that his own character had already demonstrated he was capable of doing. Boaz was not unsettled by what she was asking. He was moved. He blessed her. He told her that this last act of Ased was greater than the first, that by coming to him, rather than going after young men, whether poor or rich, she had shown a loyalty and a wisdom that the whole town would recognize. He would do what she asked, but there was the matter of the other Redeemer, the nearer one, the one who had the prior claim. In the morning, if that man was willing to redeem, let him do it. But if not, Boaz would, as the Lord lives. He asked her to lie down until morning and then to leave before it was light enough for anyone to be recognized. He was protecting her. He was thinking about her reputation before he was thinking about anything else, and in that instinct the quality of his character showed itself again. The same instinct that had told his workers not to touch her, the same instinct that had offered her grain and water and a place at the meal. He was a man who protected the vulnerable as a first instinct rather than an afterthought. Before she left, he filled her shawl with 6 measures of barley. He did not want her to go back to her mother-in-law empty-handed. The word empty is the same word Naomi had used when she returned to Bethlehem. "I came back empty," she had said. Boaz was refusing to let that be true. He was sending Ruth back full, the way the house of bread was supposed to send people away, with more than they came with the weight of abundance in their arms. She went back to Naomi. She told her everything. Naomi listened, and then she said, "Sit still. Wait. The man will not rest until the matter is settled today." She knew him. She knew that a man who had acted with this much intentionality all through the harvest was not going to let the night at the threshing floor dissolve without resolution. He would go to the gate. He would find the nearer kinsman. He would do what needed to be done. She was right. Boaz was already at the gate before the morning had fully arrived. The gate of an ancient city was more than an entrance. It was the civic centre, the place where the life of the community organized itself around the transactions and decisions that kept a society functioning. Contracts were witnessed at the gate. Legal disputes were adjudicated there. Property changed hands there. The elders of the city sat at the gate because the gate was where the city's business happened, where the authority of the community was exercised and recorded in the only way available to a society before writing had become universal, which was through the testimony of witnesses who would remember what they had seen and could be called upon to confirm it later. When Boaz went to the gate that morning and sat down, he was placing himself inside that system. He was not going to handle the matter privately. He was going to handle it publicly, in the way that would make the outcome secure and unambiguous, and witnessed by people whose testimony would stand. The nearer kinsmen came by, as people came by the gate in the morning, on their way to their fields or their work, and Boaz called to him. The scripture does not give us this man's name. He is referred to simply as such a one, a phrase that in the Hebrew has a slightly dismissive quality, as if he is a man whose name is not important enough to preserve. This is the narrative's way of telling us that the nearer kinsman will make a choice that removes him from the story, that his unwillingness to act will define him as someone who declined a role that mattered, and that the story will move forward without him. Boaz gathered 10 elders and put the situation plainly. Naomi was selling the field that had belonged to Elimelech. The nearer kinsman had the right of first refusal. Did he want to buy it? The man said yes, he would redeem it. Then Boaz added the part of the transaction that the man had perhaps not fully considered. The field came with Ruth. Buying the field meant also taking responsibility for Ruth, the Moabite widow of Mahlon, and having children with her in the name of her dead husband, so that the name of the dead would not disappear from Israel. This changed the calculation entirely. Buying the field alone was a straightforward matter of keeping land in the family. Buying the field and taking Ruth as a wife, and having children who would be counted as Mahlon's heirs rather than his own heirs was a different kind of transaction, one that would complicate his own inheritance and potentially reduce what passed to his own children. The man reconsidered. He could not redeem it, he said. He would not be willing to damage his own inheritance. The language is exact. He was concerned about himself, about what belonged to him, about what he would pass on to those who came after him. He made the calculation that most people make when the cost of faithfulness becomes too high. He stepped back. He drew off his sandal, which was the legal gesture that transferred his right of redemption to Boaz, and he handed it to Boaz in the presence of the witnesses. With that gesture, his part in the story was over. He would live the rest of his life in Bethlehem, tending his land and raising his children and growing old, and he would never know, or perhaps would know too well, what that sandal had cost him. Boaz turned to the witnesses and made his declaration. "You have heard. I am buying the field that belonged to Elimelech and to Chilion, and to Mahlon from the hand of Naomi. I am also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the dead on his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers and from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses today." The elders said, "We are witnesses," and then they blessed them. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and like Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem, and may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. The blessing is full of names: Rachel and Leah, the great mothers; Ephrathah, the ancient name for Bethlehem and its surrounding region; Perez, the son of Judah and Tamar, another story of an unexpected woman in the lineage of the covenant people." The elders were placing Ruth inside a long chain of women who had stood at the margins of what was expected and had been drawn into the centre of what mattered. They were saying that her story rhymed with older stories, that what was happening now had happened before in different forms, that the God of Israel had a pattern of working through the unexpected, the foreign, the overlooked, the ones who should not have been included but were. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. These words, "and the Lord gave her conception," are quietly significant. Ruth had been married to Mahlon for 10 years, and had borne no children in that marriage. Whether this was a matter of Mahlon's fertility or Ruth's, or simply a matter of circumstances that were not explained, the scripture does not say. But now, with Boaz, in the town of Bethlehem, in the fullness of a story that had been moving toward this moment through every road and field and midnight conversation, the Lord gave her conception. The one who had orchestrated the famine and its end, who had watched Naomi leave Bethlehem and return to it, who had guided Ruth's feet to the specific field of a specific man on the specific morning when that man happened to come out to check on his harvest, the one who had been present in every detail of this story even when none of the characters could see him clearly, gave Ruth what she had not been given before. She bore a son. The women of the neighborhood rejoiced. They came to Naomi because this child was as much Naomi's as Ruth's, because the whole arc of the story had been about restoring what Naomi had lost, and they said a son has been born to Naomi. And they called his name Obed. Obed means servant or worshipper. He was a servant of God before he knew what that meant, named by a community of women who had watched a story of loss and loyalty arrive at something that looked, against all odds, like abundance. They put him in Naomi's arms, and she held him to her chest and became his nurse, and the woman who had called herself bitter held in her arms the evidence that bitterness was not the end of her story. The scripture ends with a genealogy. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of David. 10 generations from Perez to David, and in the middle of those 10 generations, Ruth, the Moabite woman who had made a promise on a road, the foreign gleaner who had bent her back over someone else's field day after day and brought home the grain and laid it at an old woman's feet, the daughter-in-law who had said, "Where you go, I will go," without knowing where that going would eventually lead. It led here, to a baby in Bethlehem, to a genealogy that ran forward through time to a shepherd boy who would become a king and a poet whose words would outlast his kingdom by millennia, the psalms that have comforted every generation of people who have ever lived with grief or fear or wonder or gratitude, the psalms that have been sung in every language human beings have found to sing in, the psalms that have accompanied the dying and the grieving and the joyful and the lost. Those psalms came from a man whose grandmother's grandmother was a woman from Moab who refused to let an old woman walk home alone. This is what the scripture is doing when it tells the story of Ruth and ends it with a genealogy. It is showing us the distance between the moment of faithfulness and the full reach of its consequences. It is inviting us to hold both things at once. The woman on the road, making a private decision in a private moment, and the king in his palace, singing songs that would be sung forever. the ordinary act and the extraordinary outcome, the choice that seemed small and the change that was anything but. We are not very good at seeing this distance when we are in the middle of it. Ruth on the road did not know about David. She did not know about the Psalms. She did not know that the people she was walking toward would eventually become the people who told this story to the people who told it to the people who told it to you. She knew an old woman, and she knew a road, and she knew that the right thing to do was to walk the road with the old woman rather than let her walk it alone. That is always the scale at which faithfulness operates. It operates at the scale of the person in front of you, the moment you are in, the choice that is available to you right now. The distance between that moment and its consequences is invisible to the person making the choice. You cannot see it. You can only choose the faithfulness that is in front of you and trust that the rest will follow. The rest always follows. Not always in the ways we expect, not always in our lifetime, not always in any form we would recognize as reward. But Hesed, the covenant faithfulness that Ruth embodied on that road and in that field and on that threshing floor, does not disappear into the air. It does not evaporate. It enters into the fabric of things and becomes part of what the world is made of. It shows up in the children of the people who received it, and in their children, and in their children's children, moving forward through time in ways that cannot be traced or measured but that are real. The night air is very quiet now. The story has been told. The roads have been walked. The fields have been gleaned. The grain has been threshed and winnowed and measured and carried home. A child has been born and named and placed in an old woman's arms, and the old woman who came home calling herself empty is holding a full and living thing against her chest. Whatever roads you have been walking, whatever fields you have been moving through, whatever weight you have been carrying that feels too heavy for one person to carry alone, let the story of Ruth accompany you now into the quiet hours. Let it remind you that the ordinary acts of faithfulness are not small. Let it show you that loyalty, the kind that stays when leaving, would be easier, the kind that bends down and does the necessary work without announcing itself, the kind that makes a promise and keeps it even when the promise costs more than it should, that loyalty is woven into the deepest structure of how the world works. The Lord does not forget Hesed. He does not forget what his people do for each other in the hard seasons, on the dusty roads, in the borrowed fields, in the dark hours before dawn. He sees it. He names it. He finds ways, in his own time and in ways that exceed our ability to plan or predict, to honor it. Let yourself rest now. Let the fields of Bethlehem spread out in whatever landscape your mind finds when it begins to let go of the day. Let the golden grain stand tall in the morning light. Let the voices of Naomi and Ruth and Boaz and the women of the neighborhood fade into the background murmur of ancient life, the kind of life that was full of loss and full of grace in equal measure, the kind of life that most human lives are. You are loved. You are held. The faithfulness that sustained Ruth on her road is the same faithfulness that holds the world in place tonight. Rest in that. Let it carry you down. The story of Ruth is complete. The loyalty that walked from Moab to Bethlehem has done everything it needed to do. Now there is only the quiet and the dark and the breath moving in and out, and the long, gentle descent into sleep. Good night. And may the wings that sheltered Ruth shelter you also through the hours that remain until morning. There is a particular kind of peace that comes when a story ends well, not perfectly, not with every grief resolved or every question answered, but well, the way the story of Ruth ends well. Loss and loyalty and providence converging into an outcome that none of the characters could have engineered, that arrived not because anyone was clever enough to arrange it, but because people kept being faithful to each other in the ordinary moments of ordinary days. And faithfulness, in this story as in every story that runs deep enough, accumulates into something that changes the shape of what is possible. We are drawn to stories like Ruth's because they remind us of something we suspect is true, but have difficulty holding on to in the middle of our own lives. They remind us that the small choices matter, that the decision to stay or go, to speak or be silent, to reach out or pull back, to keep a promise when the cost of keeping it turns out to be higher than expected. These decisions are not as small as they appear in the moment of making them. They carry consequences that extend beyond what we can see. They shape not only our own lives, but the lives of people we will never meet. People who will be born long after we're gone. People who will carry something forward that we placed in the stream of things without knowing it. Ruth did not know she was placing something in the stream of things. She was doing what seemed right, which is usually all any of us can do. She saw an old woman on a road, and she could not leave her. She saw a field, and she asked if she could glean in it. She heard a plan, and she said, "I will do what you say." She went to the gate, and she waited. She received what was given to her, and brought it home and laid it at her mother-in-law's feet. Each of these acts was its own complete thing, asked nothing of the future, expected nothing from history. She was just living her life, one faithful day at a time, in a foreign country, with a woman she loved. And the world that came after her is different because she did. This is not a lesson, exactly. It does not reduce to an instruction. It is more like a window that the story holds open, a view of something that is always true but not always visible. The window shows you the space between the ordinary moment and its extraordinary consequences, and it invites you to trust that space even when you cannot see across it. Ruth could not see across it. She could only see the road in front of her and the woman walking it. Sometimes that is all we need to see. The harvest is in. The threshing floor has been swept. The gate has heard its witnesses, and the promises have been made, and the blessing has been spoken. Obed is sleeping in Naomi's arms, warm and small and full of future, dreaming the dreams of a child who does not yet know what his life will mean, but who is already, in his very existence, the answer to a decade of grief and a decade of faithfulness intertwined. Let him sleep. Let Naomi rest. Let Ruth and Boaz find in each other the life they were being moved toward all along, through the long fields and the midnight conversations and the gate where the elders gathered in the morning light. Let the town of Bethlehem settle into its evening rhythms, the fires banked, the children put to bed, the dogs growing quiet in the streets, and let yourself settle too, wherever you are, into the particular geography of your own rest. The day has done what days do. It has given you things and asked things of you and moved you through its hours. Now it is releasing you. Now it is saying, the work is done for today, the road has gone as far as it goes tonight. You can put down what you have been carrying and close your eyes and let the dark do what the dark is for. Ruth rests. Naomi rests. Boaz rests. The grain is in the storehouse. The child is breathing. The town is quiet. You can rest too. Sleep is not failure. Sleep is not an interruption of faithfulness. Sleep is part of the rhythm that makes faithfulness possible, the restoration that allows a person to go back to the field in the morning, to get up and walk the road again, to keep the promises that need keeping over the long course of a life rather than only in the dramatic moments. Ruth slept every night of her harvest season. She rested between the days of gleaning. She could not have done what she did if she had not also known how to rest. So rest. Let the story of Ruth move through whatever part of your mind is still listening. Let it do whatever it needs to do in the quiet hours. Stories like this one have been doing their work in people's sleep for thousands of years, settling into the deeper layers of how we understand ourselves and each other, shaping the choices we make in the morning without our being able to say exactly how or when we learned the thing that shaped them. The road from Moab to Bethlehem is very long and very quiet tonight. 2 women walk it in the dark, and one of them has promised not to leave, and the other has accepted the promise, and they are walking together toward a future neither of them can see. Trust the walk. Trust the faithfulness that got you this far. Trust that the field will be there in the morning, and that you will have what you need to glean it, and that what you carry home will be enough. Good night. The story holds you. The dark is safe. Sleep now, and rest well, and meet the morning when it comes with whatever you need to meet it. The night is long, and the stars are out over Bethlehem, and somewhere in a small house a baby breathes in and breathes out, and does not know yet what he will mean to the world, only that he is warm and held and loved. You're also held, also loved, also part of a story longer and deeper than the part you can currently see. Rest in that. Let it be enough. Let it be more than enough. Sleep. There is a country east of the Jordan River where the land rises into a high plateau, and the air is different from the air of the valleys below. The wind comes in off the desert to the east, and carries with it the smell of dry grass and distance, the smell of a land that is old and patient, and not much interested in the small affairs of the people who move across it. Moab was this country, and Ruth grew up in it, and it shaped her the way all landscapes shape the people who are born into them, quietly, over time, without anyone deciding that this was what was happening. We do not know Ruth's childhood. The scripture does not give it to us. We do not know her mother's name or her father's name, or whether she had sisters or brothers, or what she was like as a small girl learning the rhythms of the life she'd been born into. We do not know how she came to marry Marlon, whether it was arranged by their families or whether they chose each other in some more personal way, whether she loved him immediately or grew into love over the years of their marriage. All of this is before the story the scripture tells us, in the invisible life that precedes the moment when a person becomes a character in a narrative that will be remembered. What we know is what she chose when she was given the choice. And the choice she made tells us something about who she had been all along, even before the story began. People do not arrive at extraordinary acts of loyalty from nowhere. They arrive at them through a whole prior life of small loyalties, small choices to stay and show up and keep their word, a life in which the habit of faithfulness has been practiced often enough that when the extraordinary moment arrives, the person finds they are already pointed in the right direction. Ruth had been faithful to Marlon through whatever the 10 years of their marriage had contained. She had been a daughter-in-law to Naomi, not just in name but in the daily texture of actual life, the meals and the conversations and the small kindnesses that are the substance of what it means to live beside someone. She had built, in the household in Moab, a life that was woven together with the lives of these people from another country, and she had woven it carefully and well, with the kind of care that creates real bonds rather than just the appearance of them. So when the moment of choosing came, it was not a moment of heroism in the dramatic sense. It was a moment in which who she had already been met the question of who she would be next, and answered it in the only way that was true to her. She could not leave Naomi because she was not the kind of person who left. She had not been that kind of person through 10 years of ordinary life, and she was not going to become that kind of person in the extraordinary moment when leaving would have been easiest. Character does not change at the critical moment. It reveals itself at the critical moment. What Ruth showed on the road to Bethlehem was what she had been all along. Bethlehem was a town of about 500 to 1,000 people in the period when this story is set, small enough that everyone knew everyone, small enough that the return of a woman who had left 10 years earlier with her family was genuinely noticed and genuinely talked about. The town had its fields and its houses and its well and its gate and its patterns of daily life that had been established over generations, the same patterns that all small towns in all times establish when they have been in the same place long enough, the patterns that tell people when to plant and when to harvest, and who belongs where and what is expected of them. Into this small and knowing town came Naomi and Ruth, and the town had to figure out what to do with them. Naomi it already knew, or had known, the woman she had been before the famine and the years in Moab. Ruth it did not know at all. She was new and foreign and attached to someone the town did remember, and she was going to have to find her place in it through the slow process of becoming known. The field was the first place where she became known. The harvesters saw her. Boaz's foreman knew her story well enough to tell it to Boaz in a few sentences. The workers in the field watched her bend and gather through the long hours of the hot day. By the time she had been gleaning in Boaz's field for a few weeks, her presence there had become a familiar thing, a part of the landscape of the harvest season, one of the expected sights of those golden weeks when the whole community was organized around the work of bringing in the grain, and what the community saw was a woman who worked. This is not a small thing. In a community built around agricultural labor, the willingness to do hard work without complaint and without stopping was the primary evidence that a person deserved their place in the community. Ruth earned her place through the sweat of the harvest weeks, through the early mornings and the long afternoons and the evening walks back to town with the grain heavy in her arms. She did not try to integrate herself into Bethlehem through cleverness or strategy. She integrated herself through the most honest means available to her, which was showing up and working. The women of Bethlehem were watching too. They were the ones who would come to Naomi when Obed was born and say, "A son has been born to Naomi." They were the ones who would name the child and place him in his grandmother's arms. They were already the community that surrounded Naomi in her grief and would surround her in her restoration, the network of relationships through which the life of a small town actually sustains itself. And they were watching Ruth the whole time, taking the measure of this Moabite woman who had attached herself to one of their own, deciding, in the slow way that small communities decide these things, whether she was to be trusted. She was. The blessing they gave at her wedding to Boaz, "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and like Leah," was the blessing of people who had made up their minds about someone. You do not invoke the names of the great mothers of Israel over a woman you do not trust. You do not place a foreigner inside the lineage of Rachel and Leah unless you have decided that she belongs there. The women of Bethlehem decided, and their decision was generous and unequivocal because they had seen what she did and they knew what it was worth. This is how communities are supposed to work. This is what the law of Moses was trying to build when it insisted that the corners of the fields be left for the poor and the stranger, when it required the gleaning to be available and the gleaner to be unmolested. It was trying to build a community in which the outsider had a pathway in which the person with nothing had access to enough, in which the foreigner was not left to starve at the edge of the town's abundance, but was given a specific and dignified way to participate in the community's life. The law was trying to create the conditions for exactly what happened with Ruth. A foreign woman arriving with nothing and finding, through the combination of her own character and the community's faithfulness to its own rules, a place where she could belong. Not every story of this kind ends the way Ruth's did. Not every gleaner meets a Boaz. Not every widow finds a redeemer. The system the law created was better than no system, but it was still dependent on the willingness of the people with land and power to honor it, and people are not always willing. Boaz could have ignored Ruth. He could have allowed his workers to drive her from the field, or simply have not told his workers to help her, or have eaten his meal without inviting her to share it. He was not required by law to do what he did. He did it because he was the kind of man who did it, a man in whom the letter of the law had become the spirit of the law, who did not merely comply with what was required, but extended it in the direction of genuine generosity. The combination of Ruth's character and Boaz's character, and Naomi's wisdom, and the community's willingness to bless what they saw happening is what makes this story possible. Remove any one of these elements and the outcome changes. Take away Ruth's loyalty and she goes back to Moab. Take away Boaz's generosity and she goes home with less grain than she needed. Take away Naomi's wisdom and the opportunity of the threshing floor is never identified. Take away the community's blessing and the marriage has a harder path than it needed. The story works because all of these people are who they are simultaneously, and their characters line up in a way that creates space for something good to happen. This is not an accident. This is the shape that providence takes in this story, and in many stories the shape of multiple human goodnesses converging in time to make something possible that could not have been made by any one of them alone. Ruth could not redeem herself. Naomi could not redeem herself. Even Boaz, with all his power and wealth and willingness, could not simply declare the outcome he wanted without the legal steps, without the gate and the witnesses and the sandal and the nearer kinsman's choice. Each element of the story required the others. Each person's faithfulness depended on and enabled the faithfulness of the others. This is a picture of how human community is supposed to function. It is not a picture of individual heroism, of one extraordinary person rescuing everyone else through the force of their singular virtue. It is a picture of people being good in their own particular ways, in the situations that are available to them, and of those goodnesses fitting together like the parts of a harvest. No single act of gleaning enough on its own, but the whole of it, the whole accumulated weight of all the faithful days, adding up to an ephah, to a threshing floor full of grain, to a child in an old woman's arms. The town of Bethlehem does not know yet what it has participated in. The elders who sat at the gate and witnessed Boaz's declaration do not know that the genealogy being established at that gate will run forward through generations to the greatest king their people will ever produce. The women who put Obed in Naomi's arms and gave him his name do not know that they are naming the grandfather of David. The community that welcomed Ruth and watched her, and eventually embraced her, does not know that it has welcomed into itself a thread of the divine plan that will weave through the history of its people for the rest of time. They are just people in a small town, being good to each other as best they can, doing what the law requires and sometimes more than what it requires, witnessing and blessing and naming and holding. They do not need to know what it all means. They only need to be who they are. This is the hidden grace of the story. The characters in it do not have the view that we have. Reading or listening centuries and millennia later, they cannot see what we can see. They cannot know what we know. They are moving through their lives from the inside, without the narrative perspective that makes everything make sense in retrospect. They are just living. and they're living, faithful and careful, and sometimes stumbling and always real, is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything the story needs. You're also living from the inside. You also cannot see what the person with the long view might be able to see about your own story, what the choices you are making right now will eventually produce, which of your ordinary faithful acts is the act that will matter most, which of your small kindnesses is the one that will send something rippling forward into a future you will never see. You do not need to know these things. You only need to be who you are, in the situations that are available to you, doing what seems right and good and faithful in each day as it comes. The harvest will come in, the grain will be stored, the winter will pass and the spring will come and the fields will be ready to receive the seeds again, and the whole cycle will continue, as it has continued since the first people learned to plant and harvest in this part of the world, as it will continue long after the last generation to tell Ruth's story has told it for the last time. The cycle is patient. It does not hurry. It gives you time to be faithful in the way that faithfulness actually takes, which is day by day, season by season, one effort at a time. Let the grain lie heavy in your arms tonight, metaphorically, the weight of whatever you have carried through this day, and let it be enough to know that you have carried it. Let the field stretch out in whatever direction your mind wanders when it begins to let go of waking, golden in a light that has no particular time to it, the timeless light of a story that has been told so many times it has become part of the light itself. Ruth is there, in the field, bent low over the stubble, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who's been doing this for weeks and knows exactly how to hold the stalks and shake them and gather what is worth gathering and let go of what is not. She's not thinking about David. She's not thinking about bloodlines or genealogies or the long reach of her choices into an invisible future. She's thinking about the grain in her hands and the light on her back and the old woman waiting for her at the house in town, and she's doing what she came to do, which is to make sure that the old woman has enough to eat. That is all. That is everything. That is, as it turns out, more than enough. Rest now. The story will keep. It has been keeping for thousands of years, and it will keep through the night. Ruth will be in the field in the morning, and Naomi will be at the house, and Boaz will come riding out to check on the harvest, and the story will unfold again as it always has, patient and unhurried, moving toward its ending in the way that all good things move, slowly and without announcement, arriving before you realized it was on its way. You do not have to hold the story. It holds itself. It has been holding itself since before you were born. Let it hold you for these hours while you sleep. Let it be the ground you rest on, the quiet certainty beneath the uncertainty that comes with every day, the assurance that faithfulness is not wasted, that loyalty matters, that the small good choices accumulate into something the world needs. The night is quiet over Bethlehem. The harvest is in. The child is breathing. The old woman holds what she thought she had lost. The young woman is beside her husband, who chose her in front of witnesses and named what she was worth. Something has been restored. Not everything. Not perfectly. The husbands are still dead. The sons are still gone. The years of loss cannot be unlived. But something has been restored that was lost, and it was restored not by a miracle from outside the story, but by the faithfulness of people inside it. People who were good to each other in the ways they were able to be good, who stayed when they could have left, who gave when they could have kept, who saw what needed to be done and did it. This is what the world runs on. This is the fuel of human continuity, the thing that keeps the generations connected to each other across the long distances of time. Not the dramatic interventions, not the burning bushes and the parted seas and the voices from heaven, though these also have their place in the larger story. But the daily faithfulness, the ordinary hesed, the chosen loyalty of ordinary people in ordinary fields doing what seems right with what they have. Ruth had very little. A mother-in-law who had told her to leave, a field she had to ask permission to glean in, a language that was close to but not identical to her own, a culture she was learning as she went, a reputation that had to be built from nothing in a community that did not know her. She had her character, which is to say she had herself, which is everything a person ultimately has, and she brought it to the situation in front of her and let it do what it could. It was enough. It is always enough, when it is the real thing. Sleep is gathering now, the soft edges of the night pressing in from all sides, the story settling into the deeper silence that lives beneath words. Let it. Let the words carry you as far as they can carry you, and then let them go. Let the story continue without you in the part of the mind that goes on telling stories even after the conscious waking self has stopped listening. Ruth will be there, in that deeper country where stories live when no one is reading them. She'll be walking her road, or bending in her field, or sitting with Naomi in the quiet evening, or lying at the feet of a good man on a threshing floor, waiting to find out what her faithfulness will make possible. The story knows how to take care of itself. It has been doing it for a very long time. Trust it tonight. Trust the faithfulness it describes. Trust that what is true in the story is also true in the world you will wake up to in the morning, that loyalty matters and heed accumulates, and the small faithful acts carry forward in ways you cannot see. You are held. The night is good. The morning will come. Sleep now. Sleep well. Let the fields of Bethlehem and the roads of Moab and the gate of the elders and the house where Naomi holds her grandson all recede into the wordless territory of rest, the country we travel every night and return from every morning, the place where the stories we have heard continue their work without our needing to direct them. Good night. And may the God of Israel, under whose wings Ruth came to take refuge, be also your refuge through the hours that remain until light. The harvest season in ancient Israel ran from early spring through early summer, beginning with the barley in March and April, and continuing through the wheat harvest in May and June. These were weeks of intense communal labour, the whole community organised around the work of bringing in the grain before the weather changed, with everyone who could work contributing to the effort in whatever capacity they were able. It was a season with its own particular character, a combination of hard physical work and communal celebration, of long hot days in the fields followed by evenings of eating and drinking, and the particular kind of satisfaction that comes from labour completed, from something grown and gathered and stored. Ruth moved through this season with the quality of attention that people who are doing something for the first time bring to it. She was not a stranger to agricultural work. Moab was also a farming country, and she'd grown up in the rhythms of planting and harvest. But she was gleaning in someone else's field, in a country that was not hers, in a community she was still learning how to be part of. And so every day of the harvest season was also a day of learning, of watching and adjusting, and finding her place in the pattern of the work. The other gleaners were there too, though the scripture does not name them or tell us much about them. There were always poor people gleaning in the fields during harvest, the widows and the orphans and the strangers that the law was specifically designed to provide for. Ruth was one of them, not a special case, not distinguished from the others in any way that the law could see, just another woman with a basket moving through the stubble in the wake of the harvesters. The distinction she had was the distinction of her character, visible only to those who took the time to notice it, and Boaz noticed it, and his noticing changed everything that came after. There is a question worth sitting with here, in the quiet of the night, in the place where the story has brought us. What does it mean to be noticed? Not in the shallow sense, not noticed for appearance or performance, or the things we do to make ourselves visible, but noticed in the way Boaz noticed Ruth, which was for the quality of her actual self, for what she had done when no one was watching, for the choice she'd made on a road between countries that she had not known anyone would ever hear about. He had heard. Someone had told him. The story of her loyalty had travelled ahead of her from Moab to Bethlehem, had arrived before she did, and prepared a kind of welcome for her. The welcome of being already known before you have introduced yourself. This is what good deeds do. They travel. They move through the networks of human relationship and arrive in places the person who did them never intended them to reach. Ruth had not told the story of her promise to Naomi in order to build a reputation. She had made her promise because it was true, because she meant it, because she could not do otherwise. And yet the story of it arrived in Bethlehem before she did, and it arrived in the ears of the right person, and that person acted on what he heard. We often feel that our good acts disappear into the air, that they are done and then gone, absorbed into the general fabric of daily life without leaving a trace. This is almost never true. The acts we do when we believe we are alone, the choices we make without witnesses, the kindnesses that happen in the ordinary moments of ordinary days, these are the acts that other people remember longest, that travel furthest, that do the deepest work in the networks of relationship that sustain human community. We are wrong about how much people notice. We are wrong about how far the things we do in private travel. Ruth gleaned in the field not knowing that Boaz's foreman was watching. She fed Naomi not knowing that the women of the neighborhood were paying attention. She kept her promise not knowing that it would be retold to the man who would become her husband, and spoken aloud at a city gate, and written down in a scroll that would eventually become part of the scripture of two world religions. She kept her promise because it was her promise, and she had made it, and that was enough reason. And the keeping of it turned out to be more than enough for everything that followed. The moon is rising now, or if there is no moon, then the stars are there. The same stars that hung over Bethlehem when Ruth was young, and the harvest was in, and Naomi was holding the baby. The sky does not change. The faithfulness of the sky is one of the things that makes sleeping under it feel safe. The constancy of it, the way it continues to arc over the world, whether anyone is watching or not, whether anyone appreciates it or not, doing what it does because it is what it does. Be like the sky tonight. Let your faithfulness be the kind that does not depend on being watched or appreciated or rewarded. Let it be the kind that happens because it is what you are, the expression of a character that has been built through the accumulated choices of all your days, the faithfulness that is not performance but substance. Ruth's faithfulness was substance. It was who she was, all the way down, in the field and on the road, and on the threshing floor and in the small house where she and Naomi sat together in the evenings. Substance endures. Performance fades, because performance requires an audience, and the audience is always eventually going to leave or stop paying attention. Substance endures because it is not dependent on any external condition. It is simply what is there in the person, in the act, in the daily choosing to be who you are. You are what you are, in the quiet of this night with no audience and no performance, just the breathing and the darkness and the long, slow descent toward rest. What is there in you when all of that falls away? What is the substance, the character, the thing that remains when the day's requirements have been met and there is nothing left to do? It is enough. Whatever it is enough. You have done what was yours to do today. You have kept what promises you could keep. You have been present in the ways that mattered, and now the night is giving you permission to rest, to stop, to let the doing be done for these hours, and to simply be in the way that living things are at rest, neither working nor performing, simply present in the world that holds them. The grain is in the storehouse. Naomi is asleep. Ruth is asleep. Boaz is asleep. The town of Bethlehem is breathing in the night, its houses dark, its fields empty, waiting for morning. The story is asleep too, resting in the way that all living things must rest, gathering itself for the next telling. And you can rest, you can put down the day and let the night do what the night does, which is to restore what the day has used, to replenish what the labor has spent, to give back to the body and the mind and the spirit what they need to go on being what they are. Rest is not absence. Rest is presence of a different kind. It is the presence that receives rather than gives, that opens rather than acts, that allows the restoration to happen rather than making it happen. Sleep is the body's great trust, the daily act of letting go that requires more faith than most of us recognize. You're giving up control for these hours. You're trusting the night, trusting the body's own wisdom about what it needs, trusting that the world will still be there when you return to it. It will be. It always has been. The world that Ruth woke up to after every night of the harvest season was the same world she had gone to sleep in, steady and familiar, the fields waiting for her, Naomi waiting for her, the work waiting to be done. She woke up and she went back to it day after day, and the steadiness of the world she returned to each morning was part of what made the faithfulness possible. Wake up to your world tomorrow. Walk back into it with whatever you have gathered from this night of rest, whatever quiet restoration has happened in the hours your body knows how to use. The fields will be there. The people you love will be there. The work that is yours to do will be waiting for you, patient as the grain, ready to be gathered. But not yet. Not yet. First there is this, the night, the quiet, the gradual loosening of the day's grip on the mind, the slow softening of the boundary between waking and sleeping, the gentle slide toward the place where stories continue without words. Ruth is still walking. The road from Moab goes on in the long country of memory, and she is on it, and Naomi is beside her, and the promise has been made and is being kept in real time, as promises that are really kept always are, not once but continuously, in every step of every road they walk together. Where you go, I will go, and she goes, and she goes, and she goes. Let that going carry you now, the sound of feet on a road between countries, the quiet, determined rhythm of a woman who has decided and is living into her decision, step by step, moment by moment, faithful in the way that only moment by moment faithfulness actually is. Step, step, step. The road is long, and the stars are out, and you are safe and you are held, and you can close your eyes now and let the walking go on without you. Let Ruth carry the story forward while you rest. Let the harvest accumulate in its own good time. Let the child grow in the fullness of his days. There is nothing you need to do right now except breathe and rest, and let the night work in you the way it knows how to work. Breathe, rest. The story is keeping itself. You are being kept. Sleep now. The book of Ruth is complete. 4 chapters, 1 road, 1 field, 1 threshing floor, 1 gate, 1 baby, and the world has never been the same. Sleep well, and may the morning find you restored. The fields of Bethlehem stretch on in every direction, golden in the light of a sun that never sets in the country of memory, the country of scripture, the country of stories told so often they have become part of the landscape of the human imagination itself. You can go there any time. You can stand at the edge of the field and watch Ruth move through it. Watch the harvesters swing their sickles in the long rhythm of the work. Watch Boaz come riding out from town to check on the harvest and stop when he sees her and ask who she is. You can be there when the blessing is spoken at the gate, when the women gather around Naomi and put the baby in her arms, when the name is given and the genealogy begins its long run toward David and beyond. The country of Scripture is always open. The stories are always available. They have been waiting for you, patient as the grain, ready to be received and held and carried forward in you the way all good stories are carried forward, not just in the memory but in the character, in the way you see things, in the small daily choices that are shaped by what you have heard and absorbed and made part of yourself. You have heard Ruth's story tonight, or heard it again if you knew it before. Let it do what it needs to do in you. Let it settle where it settles. Take root where it takes root. You cannot know in advance where a story will land in you, or what it will eventually grow into. You can only receive it honestly and openly and trust that the receiving is enough. The night is very deep now. The dark is total in the way that it gets in the small hours, the world reduced to breathing and heartbeat, and the faint sounds that the quiet makes when everything else has fallen silent. This is the country of real rest, the deep country, the place beneath the place of ordinary sleep where the restoration happens that can only happen in the dark and the quiet and the total release of the day. Go there if you can. Let the story take you there. Let it be the road that leads down into the country of deep rest. Let Ruth's steps on the road from Moab be the rhythm that carries you under and through and into the deep place where the body knows what it needs and takes it, without your having to direct or manage or understand. Trust the dark. It has held every human being who has ever lived through the night hours. It held Ruth in her small house in Bethlehem after the long days of harvest. It held Naomi in the same house, with the same stars outside the window, the same deep quiet wrapping itself around everything. It held the child Obed, small and warm, breathing the deep, easy breath of a baby who does not yet know the world is complicated, only that it is warm and someone is holding him. Someone is holding you too. The night is holding you. The long story of human faithfulness is holding you. The thing that carried Ruth on her road and steadied Boaz at the gate and turned Naomi's bitterness slowly into something else is the same thing that holds the world in place tonight and will hold it in place when you wake up and the day begins again. Rest in it. Rest completely. Let the holding be total, the way a baby lets itself be held, without reservation, without any part of itself held back, completely surrendered to the warmth and the safety of the arms that have it. You're in good arms tonight. Sleep. Good night. The story of Ruth is finished and it is still going on, and it will go on long after tonight, long after you wake in the morning, long after this generation has passed and the next one has come, as long as there are people who need to hear that faithfulness is not wasted, that loyalty leaves its mark, that the quiet choices are the ones that change everything. You have heard it tonight. Carry it forward in your sleep, in your waking, in whatever way it finds to live in you. Carry it the way Ruth carried the grain home to Naomi, not making a drama of it, not announcing it, just carrying it because there was something to carry and it needed to be brought home. Sleep now. Come home to rest. The morning is on its way, but it is not here yet, and the night is long and good, and it is yours. Sleep. Consider the barley. Consider how it grew in the fields of Bethlehem, rooted in the dark soil that the rains had finally returned to water, reaching upward through the weeks of spring toward the warmth of a sun that did not ask it to justify its growth. The barley did not know it was going to be gleaned by a Moabite widow. It did not know that its surplus, the part left at the corners and the stalks left for the poor, was going to feed an old woman and eventually become the grain that brought a wealthy farmer to notice the woman gathering it. The barley simply grew, as barley does, drawing what it needed from the earth and the light and the rain, following the nature it had been given, and in following its nature it became part of a story much larger than itself. This is not a lesson about grain. It is a thought about what it might mean to follow your nature, to be what you are as fully and completely as you can manage, without straining towards something you are not, and without pulling back from what you actually are. The barley does not strain to be wheat. It does not pull back from being barley. It simply is what it is, completely in every cell of itself, drawing what it needs from the world around it, and giving back what the world needs from it, including the gleaning. Ruth was fully herself. This is perhaps the deepest thing the story shows us about her. She was not trying to be someone else, not trying to perform a loyalty she did not feel, or manufacture a faithfulness that did not come from her actual center. When she made her promise on the road from Moab, she was saying what was true. When she went to the field every morning, she was doing what her love for Naomi required. When she uncovered Boaz's feet on the threshing floor, she was following the wisdom of a woman she trusted completely, and she was doing it without reserve, because partial faithfulness is not really faithfulness at all. To be fully yourself in the way that Ruth was fully herself is not easy. It requires knowing what you are, which is a kind of knowledge that most people spend a lifetime working toward and never fully achieve. It requires a relationship with your own character deep enough that when the moments of choosing arrive, you know which choice is true and which one is performance. It requires the willingness to let the true choice have its consequences, even when the consequences are uncertain, even when the truth might cost you something. Ruth let her truth cost her everything she knew and everything she had in Moab. She let it take her across a border into a country she had never lived in, to a people who had reason to look at her with suspicion, to a field where she would have to ask permission to gather what the law said she could gather, to a situation with no guarantee of any outcome at all, except the knowledge that she had done the true thing. And the true thing in this story, as in every story that follows the logic of Hesed, turned out to be the thing that made everything else possible. The night has its own kind of truth. In the dark, away from the expectations of the day, away from the performances and the roles and the face we show the world, there is something that simply is what it is, without modification, without the adjustments we make unconsciously every moment of our waking lives to fit ourselves into the shape that the world around us seems to be calling for. In the night, in the deep rest that the body is moving toward right now, that something is simply present, breathing, being, neither trying nor straining, just there. That is who you are underneath everything. That is the substance that endures when the performance is over and the audience has gone home and there is nothing left to maintain. That is the you that Ruth would recognize if Ruth could somehow stand in your room tonight and look at you, sleeping, because it is the same you that you are in your most faithful moments, your most honest choices, the moments when you did the true thing without counting the cost. Let that you rest tonight. Let it have the night, completely, without demand or agenda, just the rest that it needs to go on being what it is in the morning and the morning after and the morning after that. The threshing floor is empty now. The grain has been winnowed, and the chaff has blown away on the night wind, and what remains is what was real, what had substance, what could survive the winnowing. This is also what the dark does to the day, what sleep does to waking, what rest does to labor. It winnows. It lets what is not essential blow away, and what is essential remain. You wake up in the morning with less than you went to sleep with, in some ways, because the night has taken what was not really yours to carry, and you wake up with more than you went to sleep with, in the ways that matter, because the restoration has happened in the deep country where restoration happens. The fields are ready, the barley stands in its rows, the harvesters will come in the morning with their sickles and their strong arms, and the whole communal effort will begin again. The same effort that has been happening every spring in this part of the world for thousands of years before Ruth was born and has continued for thousands of years since she died. The harvest is eternal in the way that the things rooted in the nature of the earth are eternal. It keeps happening because the earth keeps producing, and the people keep gathering, and the need keeps being met by the provision, imperfectly and variably, but on the whole with enough left over for the gleaner. Be at peace with being a gleaner sometimes. Be at peace with gathering what is left at the corners and the edges, with taking what is provided rather than what you planned for, with finding abundance in the places where abundance arrives unexpectedly, rather than in the places you expected it. Ruth did not expect Boaz. She expected to glean, and to carry home what she gleaned, and to feed her mother-in-law and to do it again the next day. The field she happened to come to, the field that belonged to the man who happened to be a relative of her dead husband, was not in her plan. It was in the plan of something larger than her plan, and she was available to receive it because she was not so attached to her own plan that she could not see what was actually there. Be available. Be present to the field you are actually in, not the field you thought you would be in, not the field you planned for, not the field where everything would have been easier and more predictable. The actual field, with all its particularities, its specific soil and its specific light and its specific harvest, and its specific surprising owner who turns out to notice you. The actual field is the only place where the actual story can happen. Your actual life is the only life in which your actual story can happen. Not the life you planned, or the life you imagine someone else is living, or the life you think you should have by now. This one. The one that brought you to this night, to this listening, to the particular configuration of loss and love and ordinary faithfulness that is yours and no one else's. This is the field. This is where the gleaning happens, and it is enough. Ruth's field was enough, and it was more than enough, and in the end it was exactly what she needed, not because it was ideal in every way, but because she was fully present in it, doing the work with the full force of who she was, not holding anything back, bringing her whole self to each day of the harvest. Bring your whole self to rest tonight. Not a performance of rest, not the appearance of settling down while the mind keeps turning over the day's unfinished business, but the real thing, the whole self-releasing, the arms uncrossing, the shoulders dropping, the jaw unclenching, the breath slowing to the pace of a body that is truly letting go. Let go. The day is done, the field is empty, the grain is home. Whatever was yours to do today was done, or it was not done, and it will wait. Because the work that waits overnight is almost always still there in the morning, and the work that does not wait was not ultimately yours to control in the first place. Let what must wait, wait. Let what is done, be done. Let the boundary between today and tomorrow be honoured, because it is real, because the night is real, because rest is real, because you are a living thing with a living thing's needs, and one of the most fundamental of those needs is this, the nightly returning to the ground of yourself, the dark and quiet restoration. Ruth rests. Naomi rests. The child Obed rests in the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a newborn, and the women who helped bring him into the world rest in their houses across the town, and Boaz rests with the satisfaction of a man who has done what needed to be done and done it well and completely. Bethlehem rests. The fields rest. The grain in the storehouse rests, full of the nourishment that will carry the town through the coming months, and you rest. The stars are doing what they do, steady and patient and indifferent to the small dramas below them, burning with the constancy that makes them the great symbol of faithfulness across every culture that has ever looked up and noticed them. The same stars that hung over Ruth on her road, the same stars, the same patient burning, the same faithful presence through every night, in the long story of human longing and human loyalty and human rest. They will be there when you wake up, not visible, because the day will have arrived and the light will have washed them out, but there, continuing their burning in the invisible sky behind the blue, waiting for the next night to be seen again. The faithfulness of stars is the faithfulness of things that do not need to be noticed in order to continue being what they are. Be like the stars tonight. Be faithful without needing to be seen. Be present without needing to be noticed. Burn with whatever it is in you that is yours to burn with, quietly, steadily, through the dark hours, and trust that the morning will find you still there, still yourself, still burning. The road from Moab to Bethlehem is very quiet at this hour. There is no one on it now. The travellers have all arrived or have stopped for the night, and the road itself rests in the way that roads rest. Patiently, available, waiting for the next feet that will need it. It has carried Ruth and Naomi. It will carry others, countless others, in the years and centuries that follow, travellers who do not know they are walking the same road, who do not know the name of the woman who walked it with such determination and such love. The road does not need them to know. The road simply is what it is, and the faithfulness of all who have walked it with good intent is somehow part of it now, laid into it, invisible but real, the way all the good that has ever been done in a place becomes part of that place, part of its atmosphere, part of what it is like to be there. The world is full of such places, roads walked by the faithful, fields gleaned by the poor and the patient, gates where witnesses gathered to say what was true and make it real, houses where old women held babies they thought they would never hold. The accumulated goodness of human history is everywhere in the world, invisible but present, the way the stars are present even in daylight, the way the barley is present in the earth even before it has grown. You are walking a road that others have walked before you. You're gleaning in a field that others have gleaned in before you. You're not the first person to be weary at the end of a hard season, not the first person to wonder whether the faithfulness is worth it, not the first person to make a promise on a road and find that keeping it cost more than you expected. You are not alone in this. You have never been alone in this. The great cloud of witnesses, as one letter in the Christian scripture calls them, the people who have gone before in faith and faithfulness, and sometimes in struggle and failure and faithfulness again, those people are part of the air you breathe, part of the ground you stand on, part of the story you're in the middle of. Ruth is among them, Naomi is among them. Boaz and the women of Bethlehem and the 10 elders who sat at the gate and said, "We are witnesses," all of them are among them, part of the great company of the faithful dead who have bequeathed to the living the world they now inhabit. Receive what they have left you, receive it tonight, in the quiet, in the rest, in the deep country where the restoration happens. Receive the accumulated faithfulness of all who have come before and carry it forward in whatever way the next day makes possible. This is how the story continues, not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but through the daily receiving and the daily carrying forward, the daily choosing of Hesed in whatever form the day makes available, the daily gleaning in whatever field you find yourself in. The night is nearly spent, not in the literal sense. The hours still have a long way to go before the dawn, but in the sense of the story, in the sense of what words can carry you through, before they must give way to the wordless country of actual sleep. The words have taken you this far, and now they release you. Now they step back and let the silence do what silence does, which is to hold what words have been saying in a different and deeper way, to carry it further in than words can go, to plant it in the parts of you that receive rather than analyze, that simply absorb and hold and slowly become what they have received. Let the silence have you now. Let the story of Ruth settle into the silence the way grain settles, after the winnowing, quiet and complete, and ready for what comes next. The next thing is morning. But the morning is a long way off, and between here and there is the full dark country of rest, the country that every human being has travelled every night of their lives, the country that restores, that renews, that makes the morning possible. Go there now. Let the field and the road and the gate and the baby and the old woman and the faithful young woman and the good man and the whole small town of Bethlehem in all its ordinariness and all its unexpected grace go with you into the dark, companions for the hours that remain, presences in the country of sleep that need no words and make no demands and simply are, the way all true things simply are. Good night, good rest, good morning when it comes. The story of Ruth walks with you, the Hesed of God walks with you, the faithfulness that holds the stars in place and returns the rain to the dry fields, and brings the harvest in and puts the child in the arms of the one who thought she would never hold anything again. That faithfulness walks with you through the night, and will be there when you wake. You are held, you are loved, you're not alone. Sleep now, sleep. There is a word in Hebrew that appears throughout the story of Ruth. It is the word Hesed, and it is one of those words in any language that carries more weight than any single translation can hold. English Bibles render it as loving kindness, or steadfast love, or loyalty, or mercy, or faithfulness, depending on the translation and the context. None of these captures it entirely. All of them together get close. Hesed is the covenant love that holds, the loyal love that stays, the active love that does what love requires even when doing it is costly, even when no one is watching, even when the one who loves knows that what they are giving may not be returned. Hesed is what Ruth showed Naomi on the road, not sentiment, not feeling, not the emotion we often mean when we use the word love in everyday speech, but an active choosing, a turning toward, a decision made and remade at every step of a long road. The decision to go was Hesed. The daily going to the field was Hesed. The carrying of the grain home was Hesed. The sitting with Naomi in the evenings and making sure she was fed and warm and not entirely alone was Hesed. All of it was Hesed, the practical embodiment of the promise made on the road, the promise made real in 10,000 small acts across the weeks of the harvest season and the days before it and the days after it. Hesed is also what Boaz showed Ruth, his willingness to notice her and name what she had done and protect her in his field, and invite her to eat, and rig the gleaning in her favour, and go early to the gate and stand up in front of witnesses and declare what he was going to do. All of this was Hesed, the active love that does not wait to be asked, that sees what is needed and provides it because it is right to provide it, because the covenant way of living in the world requires it. Hesed is what Naomi showed Ruth when she tried to release her on the road, when she gave her blessing and her permission to go and build her own future in Moab. Naomi's Hesed was the Hesed of self-sacrifice, of a woman so worried about the welfare of the person she loved that she was willing to lose her in order to ensure she had what she needed. It is the rarest and most costly form of love, the love that says I would rather be without you and have you well than keep you with me and harm you. The story is a story about Hesed moving through a community. Ruth shows Hesed to Naomi. Naomi shows Hesed to Ruth. Boaz shows Hesed to Ruth. The community of Bethlehem shows Hesed to both of the women by receiving them, witnessing for them, blessing what they build together, and underneath all of it, shaping it all, directing it all without any of the characters being able to see the direction, is the Hesed of God, the great faithfulness that brought the rain back to Bethlehem after the famine, that guided Ruth's feet to Boaz's field, that gave Ruth conception when she had been without children for a decade of marriage, that put the baby in Naomi's arms and turned her bitterness, not all the way, but enough, into something she could call by a different name. God is not a speaking character in this story. He does not appear in a vision, or send a prophet or part any waters, or do any of the things that God does in the more dramatic stories of the Hebrew Scripture. He is present only in what happens, in the way the pieces fit together when they should not have fit, in the way the right person was in the right field on the right morning, in the way the nearer kinsman happened to pass by the gate on the morning Boaz was sitting there. He is present in the way that water is present in the soil of a growing field, invisible but essential, the condition that makes everything else possible. This is the kind of divine presence that most of our actual lives are lived in. Not the dramatic interventions, not the burning bushes and the voices from heaven, but the quiet shaping of circumstances, the way things happen to fit together when we are paying attention and living faithfully, the way the right person appears at the right time when we are in the field that is ours to be in. We do not always recognize this presence when it is happening. Naomi did not know, when she heard that the rains had returned to Bethlehem, that she was being invited back into a story that was going somewhere she could not see. Ruth did not know, when she asked permission to glean in the field, that she was walking into the rest of her life. Boaz did not know, when he saw a woman gleaning at the edges of his harvest, that he was looking at the mother of his grandson. They did not need to know. They only needed to be faithful in the steps that were in front of them, and the steps that were in front of them turned out to be the steps of a story, much larger than any of them could see from where they stood inside it. You also do not need to know. You only need to be present to the field you are in, faithful to the promises you have made, willing to do the work that is yours to do, and available to receive what arrives unexpectedly in the ordinary course of the days. The rest is not yours to control. The rest has been doing very well without your control. Through all the thousands of years of all the stories, including this one, the harvest is in. The story is told. The night is deep. The rest that your body and mind and spirit need is available to you here and now, in the simple act of releasing what you are holding and letting the dark do what it knows how to do. Release. Release the day. Release the worry about tomorrow. Release the unfinished business, and the unanswered questions and the plans that did not go as planned, and the hopes that are still waiting to be answered. Release all of it into the night, which is large enough to hold whatever you release into it, which has been holding the released griefs and worries and hopes of every sleeping person in the world for as long as there have been people who sleep. The night is very good at this. It has had a great deal of practice. Ruth is releasing now in the story that lives in the country of sleep and scripture. She is releasing the day, the long hours in the field, the weight of the grain on the way home, the conversation with Naomi about what comes next. She is releasing the uncertainty that is always part of faithfulness, the not knowing that lives inside every promise, because no one who makes a promise can know for certain how it will be kept or what it will cost or where it will lead. She made her promise not knowing. She has been keeping it not knowing. And tonight she rests not knowing, the way all faithful people rest, trusting not in the outcome they can see, but in the faithfulness that holds them even in the dark. You are held even in the dark, especially in the dark. The dark is where holding happens most completely, where the roots of the tree go deepest, where the grain waits in the soil for the spring, where the child sleeps in the womb, where the stars burn in the vast country behind the sky. The dark is not absence. The dark is presence of a particular kind, the kind that receives, the kind that holds, the kind that works in you while you're not working, that restores while you're not trying to restore yourself. Let the dark have you. Let it hold you. Let it do what it does, which is everything necessary in the hours that remain before the morning light begins to find its way back into the sky. You are Ruth tonight, in the best sense. You're a person who has walked a road and kept a promise, and gleaned in the field and carried home the grain and sat with the old woman in the evening. You're a person who has done what the day required, and has brought home what could be brought home, and has laid it at the feet of what and who you love. And now you are resting, because rest is what comes after faithfulness. Not as a reward, not as something that must be earned, but as the next necessary thing, the part of the rhythm that makes the rest of the rhythm possible. The rhythm continues, waking and sleeping, working and resting, faithfulness and restoration, the giving out and the taking in, the harvest and the fallow, the sowing and the reaping, the road and the field and the gate and the house and then the road again. The rhythm has been going since before Ruth was born and will continue long after the last telling of her story, and it will carry you through it, as it has carried everyone who has ever lived, because the rhythm is not yours to maintain. It maintains itself. It is the rhythm of the world, reliable as the seasons, faithful as the stars. Sleep now, sleep in the rhythm. Let your breathing join it, slow and steady. The taking in and the giving out, the simple miracle of a living body doing what living bodies do. Let the rhythm carry you. Let the dark hold you. Let the morning be what the morning will be. You are held. You are loved. You are not alone. Good night. And in the morning, may you find the field ready and the grain standing and the work waiting and the capacity to do it renewed in you by this night of rest. The story of Ruth walks with you into sleep. Her hesed is in the air. Her faithfulness is in the ground. Her choice on a road between countries is somewhere in the fabric of the world you live in, woven into it so deeply that you cannot find it by looking, but can sometimes feel it in the moments when you choose to stay, to show up, to bend down and do the work, to carry home what can be carried. Carry it home. In the morning, carry it home. But first, sleep. Sleep now. The night is yours. Rest well. The world that Ruth walked into when she arrived in Bethlehem was a world ordered by covenant. Covenant is a word we use now mostly in legal contexts, in the kind of formal agreements that are recorded and witnessed and enforceable in courts. But covenant in the ancient Israelite understanding was something deeper and broader than a legal contract. It was a relationship bond that created identity and obligation simultaneously, that tied two parties together in a way that was not merely external, but internal, not just behavioral, but constitutive of who they were to each other and before the community. God had entered into covenant with Israel, and Israel's whole life was ordered in response to that covenant. The law of Moses, including the laws about gleaning and the laws about the kinsman redeemer, were expressions of the covenant life, attempts to embody in daily social practice the values that the covenant relationship made obligatory. You leave the corners of the field for the poor because you are a covenant people, because the covenant makes you responsible for one another, because the love that binds you to your God extends through you to your neighbours, and through your neighbours to the stranger at the edge of your field. The law is not a set of arbitrary rules. It is a description of what a covenant community looks like when it is living faithfully. Ruth walked into this world as a foreigner, as someone who had no natural place in the covenant. She was a Moabite, The covenant was with Israel, and yet she had spoken the words of covenant on the road. She had said, "Your people shall be my people, and your God my God." She had placed herself, by her own declaration, inside the covenant relationship, accepting its obligations and trusting its protections. And the covenant community received her, eventually and imperfectly but genuinely, because her faithfulness was recognizable to them. It looked like what they had been told covenant faithfulness looked like. It was Hesed, and they knew Hesed when they saw it, even in a foreign woman who should not have had it. This is the deep surprise at the heart of the story. The person who embodies the covenant most completely in the book of Ruth is the one who does not belong to the covenant by birth. The Moabite widow, the foreigner, the woman without standing or inheritance or natural claim, she is the one who practices Hesed most purely, most freely, most completely. She is the one of whom Boaz says, "All the town of Bethlehem knows that you are a worthy woman." She is the one into whose arms the elders pour the blessing of Rachel and Leah. She is the one who becomes the great-grandmother of David. The covenant is bigger than its official membership. The love that holds the world is not limited by the borders of the nations, or the lines of descent, or the categories that human communities use to sort themselves into insiders and outsiders. Ruth crossed from outside to inside not by renouncing her origin, but by living her nature, and her nature turned out to be perfectly aligned with the covenant values, even though she had not been raised in the covenant community. Hesed is Hesed wherever it appears. Faithfulness is faithfulness in any accent. Loyalty does not belong to any one people. This is a word for you tonight. Wherever you are in your own sense of belonging and not belonging, wherever you stand in relation to the communities that have received you fully and the ones that have held you at the edges, your faithfulness is real, regardless of whether it is fully recognized. Your Hesed counts regardless of whether the community you're in has the eyes to see it yet. Ruth's Hesed was real from the moment she chose it on the road, long before Boaz named it, and long before the elders blessed it, and long before Naomi stopped calling herself bitter. The reality of what she was doing did not depend on its being seen. Your faithfulness does not depend on being seen either. It is real. It matters. It is entering the fabric of things in ways that neither you nor anyone around you can fully track. Trust that. Trust the unseen reality of what you are doing when you are doing it faithfully. Trust that the accounting, when it comes, will be complete, that nothing will have been lost, that everything done in secret and in love is kept somewhere that is not subject to the normal laws of loss and forgetting. The night is the great keeper of what the day produces. Everything that happened today is kept in the night, held in the dark country where things that need to be held are held. The grain of your faithfulness is there. The Hesed you showed, small or large, recognized or unnoticed, is there. Let it rest there tonight, safe in the dark, needing nothing from you now except the acknowledgement that you did what was yours to do, and it was enough. It is enough. Rest now in that knowledge. The enough is real. The faithfulness is real. The love is real. And real things do not disappear. They only change form, moving from one kind of presence to another, from the visible to the invisible, from the spoken to the silent, from the waking to the dreaming. But always there, always real, always part of the great tapestry that the story of the world is weaving one faithful act at a time. You are part of that tapestry. Your particular thread, your particular colour, your particular faithfulness is woven in. It cannot be unwoven. It is there. It will be there in the morning when the weaving continues, your thread taking up its work again alongside all the others, contributing its particular quality to the whole, making the whole slightly different than it would have been without you. Without you. The world would be slightly different without you, without your particular Hesed in your particular situation, without the specific faithfulness you bring to the specific people and circumstances of your life. This is not inflation. This is not the false comfort of being told you are special in ways that have no traction in the actual world. This is the simple truth that Ruth's story demonstrates, that the choices of ordinary people in ordinary circumstances carry consequences that cannot be predicted or measured, that the thread no one expected to matter turns out to be the one that holds something together, that the Moabite widow gleaning at the edges of someone else's field turns out to be the great-grandmother of David, You do not know what you are the ancestor of. You do not know what your faithfulness is making possible for people who have not yet been born. You do not need to know. You only need to be faithful in the field you are in today, and let the rest unfold in whatever time and in whatever way the rest unfolds. Let the rest unfold tonight, in the dark, without your direction. Let the tapestry weave itself through the hours of sleep. Let the story continue without your needing to be awake for it. Let the world do what the world does in the night, which is everything necessary and nothing more. You are free for these hours, free from the obligation to direct or control or understand, free to simply be a living thing at rest, breathing and held and restored by the dark. Return to the ground of yourself so that you can return to the field in the morning with something to give. Ruth rests. The whole town of Bethlehem rests. The grain in the storehouse rests. The child in Naomi's arms rests. The road from Moab rests in the quiet of the night, empty of travellers, waiting patiently for the morning. And you rest. This is right. This is good. This is exactly what this hour is for. Sleep now. Good night. May the morning find you well. May the field be ready. May your hesed go before you, and your faithfulness follow after you. And may the God who guided Ruth's feet to the right field on the right morning guide your steps in the day that is coming. But not yet. Not yet. First there is this, the night, the quiet, the breathing, the rest. Sleep, sleep, sleep. The stars are still burning over Bethlehem. They have been burning there for the whole course of this telling, patient and steady, unaffected by the story beneath them, unmoved by the grief and the faithfulness and the gleaning and the promise and the gate and the baby. They burn because that is what they do. They have no other purpose and no other need. They simply are what they are, completely and without reservation, filling the sky with their particular quality of light. There is a kindness in the steadiness of stars. There is a particular comfort in the things that do not change, that are the same tonight as they were 1,000 years ago, that will be the same tomorrow as they are now. The constancy of the sky is the constancy of something that is not trying to be constant, that is simply expressing its nature without effort or strain. The stars do not work at burning. They simply burn. What would it mean to rest in something that does not work at its constancy? What would it feel like to let yourself be held by a faithfulness that is not effortful, that does not depend on anyone's trying, that simply is, the way the stars simply are, the way the dark simply is, the way the night that holds you simply is? There is such a faithfulness. Ruth trusted it. She walked into a country she did not know, with no guarantee of anything except the choice she had made, and the love she carried and the woman beside her on the road. She trusted that the faithfulness that runs through the world, the same faithfulness that brings the rain, and grows the grain, and turns the seasons and makes the stars burn, would be enough for what lay ahead. Not because she had a plan or a promise from God, or a vision of how it would all work out, but because she had said, "Where you go, I will go," and she meant it, and meaning it with that completeness was itself a kind of trust in something larger than herself. You are inside that same faithfulness tonight. The same constancy that held Ruth on her road is holding you on yours. The same steadiness that brought the rain back to Bethlehem is the steadiness that has brought you to this night, to this resting, to this particular moment in the particular story that is yours. Trust it. Trust it tonight, especially in the dark when trusting is harder and also purer, when there is less to distract from the simple act of leaning into what holds you. Let the holding be complete. Let it be total. Let there be no part of you that is still trying to hold itself up against the gravity of the rest, still braced against the possibility that the support will be insufficient. The support is sufficient. It has always been sufficient. The morning always comes and the field is always there, and the capacity to keep going is always renewed by the night, because the night is doing exactly what it was made to do. The night was made for this, for holding, for renewing, for the deep work that can only happen in the dark and the quiet, when the outer world has released you and you have released the outer world, and there is only the breathing and the dark and the faithful constancy of the body, continuing to do what the body does. Your body knows how to do this. It has been doing it every night of your life. It knows how to descend, how to release, how to restore. You do not have to teach it or direct it or maintain it. You only have to stop interfering with it. Stop insisting on staying awake when the sleep is ready for you. Stop holding on when the letting go is what is called for. Let go. The night is ready. The rest is ready. The restoration is ready. And you are ready, even if you did not know you were ready until this moment. Ruth is ready too. She has walked the road and gleaned the field, and sat with the old woman, and made the journey to the threshing floor, and waited at the gate and received the blessing and held the baby. She's done everything that was hers to do in this telling of her story, and now she rests in the way that people rest when they have done what was theirs to do, completely, without holding back, spent in the best sense, the sense that means given fully rather than depleted harshly. You have given what was yours to give today. Rest now in the having given. Rest in the completion, even the incomplete completion, the way most days complete, with some things done and some things waiting, and the boundary of the night drawing its line between today and tomorrow, and holding you on the right side of it for these hours, on the right side of the night, in the country of rest, held by the dark, accompanied by the story of a faithful woman on a road between countries, choosing, again and again, the person in front of her over the safer and easier and less costly choice, accompanied by the memory of an old woman who called herself bitter and ended the story holding new life in her arms, accompanied by the great constancy of the stars and the faithful burning of the darkness and the patient rhythm of a sleeping world waiting for the morning. You're in good company. You're in the best company. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Sleep now. The night is long and good. The morning will come, and Ruth will be in the field, and Naomi will be in the house, and the grain will be ready to be gathered, and the child will be breathing, and the stars will give way to the light, and everything that needed to be restored will be restored, and you will wake. But first, sleep, sleep, sleep. The dawn will break over Bethlehem as it has broken every morning since Bethlehem first became a place where people made their homes and planted their fields and told their stories to their children. The light will find its way over the hills from the east, the same direction Ruth came from, the direction of Moab, the direction of the road that brought her here. And the town will stir gradually, the way small towns stir in the morning, one house at a time, one fire rekindled, one door opened onto the cool air of a new day. Ruth will rise, Naomi will rise. The child Obed will wake and make the sounds that babies make, and someone will come to him and hold him, and the day will begin the way days begin, in the small particular necessities of living, the feeding and the washing and the going out to what waits to be done. And somewhere in the town, Boaz will rise and look out at his fields and think about what the day will ask of him, and find that he is ready for it, the way a man who has done the right thing is always ready for the day that follows, because there is no unfinished business, no unpaid debt, no promise unkept gnawing at the underside of his sleeping. He slept well. He woke ready. The gate and the witnesses and the declaration and the sandal are behind him, and the life that is now his is ahead of him, and he is a man who knows how to live into his life fully, which is to say he is ready for the morning. Be ready for your morning. Not now, not yet. There are still hours of rest between here and the morning, but in the general sense, in the sense of a life oriented toward the morning rather than away from it, toward what comes rather than mourning what has gone. The morning will bring what it brings, and some of what it brings will be hard, and some will be surprising, and some will be the ordinary necessities that make up most of the actual texture of a life. Be ready for all of it. Rest now so that you can be ready. Let the night do the work of making you ready. The restoration that happens in the deep country of sleep, the renewal that the body knows how to undertake when you give it the permission of genuine rest. You have given it that permission tonight. You're giving it that permission now. The words are growing further apart, the silences between them growing longer, the story settling into the silence rather than pulling you out of it. This is right. This is the story working as it is supposed to work, carrying you to the edge of sleep and then releasing you, handing you over to the dark, stepping back so that the rest can begin. The rest is beginning. Feel it. The weight of your body on what holds it. The warmth that has gathered in the places that are at rest. The breath, slow and even, automatic. The body's faithful continuation of the most basic act of living. The eyelids heavy. The thoughts slowing, losing their edges, becoming less distinct, more like shapes than statements, more like colours than words. This is sleep arriving. It comes the way good things come, without announcement, moving in at the edges and slowly filling the centre, displacing what was there with what is more needed now. Let it come. Let it fill you. Ruth is asleep. Naomi is asleep. Obed is asleep. Boaz is asleep. Bethlehem is asleep. And you're almost there. Almost sleep.